everyone, and welcome back to the GroupM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Baiman. Today, GroupM's Global President of Business Intelligence, Brian Wieser, and I will take you through some of the key insights and takeaways from the final chapter of the latest paper authored by Brian and GroupM Senior Advisor, Rob Norman, titled Media Landscapes. Thanks for joining us again, Brian. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get right into it here with the sixth and final chapter titled The Continuing Relevance of Media Agencies. Now, in this chapter, you touch on two relatively hot button topics in our industry today. The first is the continued relevance of media agencies. So what is the role of media agencies in an increasingly complex media landscape, especially when the walled gardens are rising?
Well, you could certainly argue we would say that, wouldn't we? But that said, I think we can objectively say, and as I think we lay out through the rest of the document, that the world is really complicated. And I think that the more that marketers have choices about how they allocate their resources, and the more different ways there are to allocate resources, and the more different ways there are to prioritize, the more that expert advice is important. There's plenty of ways for marketers to capitalize on advice. That includes insourcing, bringing talent in-house. And there are plenty of marketers where that makes a ton of sense. But for the vast majority of marketers, the kind of expertise, the kind of a scale of knowledge, of systems, processes to manage this world, which is not getting simpler, benefits substantially from having a third party, such as a media agency, involved.
Yeah, and it's it ties kind of closely into the other hot button topic in this chapter, and that's in-housing. What would you say is the immediate and longer term impact of something like in-housing, and should we expect increased automation in the future?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a few things to point out when it comes to in-housing. So first of all, there are some marketers where, as I said, it makes all the sense in the world to bring resources in-house. And we've written previously about what those circumstances are. It could mean you need a really, really tight time frame on how you execute, and everything you do is tied to data that can only live inside the organization, and you don't necessarily prioritize branding much. There's many marketers whose businesses or have brands that are orienting in that direction, and that's one set of marketers, but it's a very small set of marketers where that's going to be true. I think that there's another set of marketers where they may want more control, they want more transparency, they want more involvement in all the aspects of their workflows. And I think that that's sometimes what marketers actually want when they're pursuing in-housing. And there are many different ways to get all those things that marketers want. But that said, I think when marketers get that, they can sometimes call that in-housing. But it might look an awful lot like the old way of that things were being done. I think it's also worth noting when it comes to what in-housing has been is that there's a substantial volume of spending coming from marketers who didn't exist 20 years ago. You think of the world's largest technology companies. Most of them did not exist 20 years ago, and they account for a large share of total spending on advertising. And although some of what they do involves agencies and media agencies specifically, they probably are disproportionately not using agencies. To the extent we know that as companies mature and pursue efficiencies and try to optimize how they manage their marketing resources, the use of expert third parties becomes much more obvious, or the need to use those third parties becomes much more obvious. So we could argue that what has been in-housing was really just the way that these companies started their operations, and it's not necessarily the way that they will sustain their operations for all of time. So what in-housing is, can vary depending on the marketer, and how it will evolve, I think will evolve with the broader media industry.
Yeah, and agencies are in fact proving to be pretty resilient. I think they're going to see some accelerated growth coming up. I know that's something that you've talked about in previous pieces outside of media landscapes.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Brian. We've had a great time with you.
Great. Well, thanks again for having me.
Afraid that's all the time we've got for today. You can listen to this podcast and all other episodes at our link in the posting above. Thanks for tuning in over the last 6 weeks to the GroupM podcasts to go through media landscapes. If you have any questions on this chapter or the paper as a whole for Brian, please leave it in the comment section below, and Brian will do his best to answer you. Thanks for listening. Good night and good luck.